Good morning. I want to welcome you to another segment of Walking Around Lewisboro. We are standing in the hamlet of Goldensbridge, and I am here in the heart of Old Goldensbridge, standing in front of St. Michael's Chapel. St. Michael's Chapel was built in 1896, and in 1996-97, we celebrated the 100th anniversary of this chapel, and we gave it the Lewisboro landmark status. In fact, on the front door of in the entryway is one of our historic landmark plaques. The chapel was built to serve the community, the surrounding community, which was at that time, I believe, mostly Irish and Catholic. The Irish Catholics and the Italians who had come to work on the railroad and also to work on what was soon to be the Croton Dam project. St. Michael's Chapel is still in use. It is part of St. Joseph's Parish, and every Sunday people come here for Mass. Now, I'd like to tell you just a little bit about where the name Goldensbridge comes from. Truthfully, we don't know the real story. There are about 3 stories. The first is when the hamlet was first situated actually on the banks of the Croton River. We needed a bridge. There needed to be a bridge to get across to the land on the west, which was part of Stevenstown, now Somers. And the first person who got his name on the map as a bridge owner was Mr. Colden. Almost Golden, but spelled with a C. And that was way back in the early 1700s. Sometime after that, around the time of the Revolutionary War, on maps it became known, the bridge became known as James Golden's Bridge. So whether at that point we assume the bridge might have been a toll bridge and you had to pay Mr. Golden some money to get across his bridge if you were going west. Then a little later on the maps, the name became the name of Abraham Goldings, Golden, I-N-G, with an S on it. So take your pick. We don't really know. However, the Croton River was an important river at that point in New York State. It was before the reservoir came through and obliterated it and turned it into a big lake. But it was important to have a bridge across it, so Goldensbridge has always been an important hamlet in our town. Originally, when the railroad came in 1847, the surrounding businesses thought this would be wonderful. This would make them into a big commercial center. It was a dairy center, a dairying center. The railroad was very instrumental in getting the milk and dairy products into New York City. And so it prospered for about 50 years. Then along came New York City saying we need clean water and we need to set up a reservoir system. And what we want to do is take Croton River, build a reservoir. When that happened with the coming of the reservoir, changes started to be made. The reservoir became almost a tourist attraction. It was a place for boating, it was a place for fishing. Hotels and boarding houses sprang up in this area of Lewisboro as well as in Cross River. The same thing happened with the reservoir there. Residents around here don't refer to it as the reservoir, they call it the lake. And for many years it was their favorite spot for picnicking and fishing. Now, that was 1900. As I say, that caused a bit of an upheaval because at least a half dozen houses and a church had to be moved away from the property that was going to become New York City reservoir property. Along with that, the dairy industry with the railroad and the reservoir, the dairy industry. In 1907, Sheffield Farms Creamery came to town. Again, big expectations. All right, let's fast forward a little bit to the the late latter half of the 20th century, the 1960s. Rockefeller and his road program. Route 22 used to be the main highway through this town, a sleepy little 2-lane road, dirt for part of the century. But in the late 1960s, it was decided this would be a great area to develop. So Route 22 became 4 lanes, and then we had the beginning of 287. 287 needed roads filing into that, so eventually 684 came. 684 with its 6 lanes of traffic obliterated what then was the town of Goldens Bridge. So what we're going to do today is to take a short walk around the village and show you some of the historic places. Welcome to Goldens Bridge's 2-room schoolhouse. It was the second schoolhouse built in Goldens Bridge. The original one stood somewhere just behind this schoolhouse, but in 1911, that schoolhouse was condemned, and this schoolhouse here on Old Bedford Road was built to accommodate the children of the area. It actually served the children of the area from 1911 until 1963 when Increase Miller was built. Children who went to school here and then went on to high school would walk along the railroad tracks down to Katona High School and finish their education there. But this schoolhouse is unique because it was a 2-room schoolhouse. It's still, if you go inside, it's now the Park and Rec office. So if you have opportunity to go inside, you'll still see vestiges of what it probably was like for the children of Goldens Bridge to go to school here. Right now, though, as I said, it serves the town of Lewisboro as the Park and Rec offices, and it's where you'd come to sign up for camp or to sign up for tennis lessons, and it's where Dana Makelum and her staff work every day. It also is on the grounds. There's a war memorial, and I'd like to show you that war memorial now. So if you'll follow me. The monument says, "Dedicated to the boys of Goldens Bridge who served their country, the Great War, 1914 to 1918." As I mentioned before, around 1900, great upheaval in the hamlet of Goldens Bridge when the reservoir came to town. At least a half dozen houses were moved out of the reservoir area up here to Old Bedford Road. The house behind me was one of them. The house across the street is also one of them, and several other houses along Old Bedford Road also were moved. But to look at them now, it looks like they've been here forever, and their lovely gardens and their lawns. So when you think of Old Bedford Road, it was really new at one time with all the houses that were moved out of the reservoir property. When you get a chance, come and take a walk or a stroll down Old Bedford Road, and I think you'll find it a very enjoyable passage of time. This house behind me was probably built around 1828, and it was moved about the time of the reservoir's coming. We're not exactly sure whether it was moved from the southern area or whether it came from the northern end of the lake, the Goldens Bridge Lake. Anyway, it's lived here for over a century, and it surely fits the spot nicely. We are here at the not very historic Goldens Bridge Railroad Station. However, since the railroad was so important to Goldens Bridge since the 1840s, I thought we ought to include it, and we'll try to bring you back into history with a few still shots that we can get out of the history book. When the train first came to Goldens Bridge in the 1840s, people just got off into the field and went to wherever they had to go. But in about 1860, the first railroad station was built, and then about 30 years later, second railroad station was built. And then along came progress, and in the 1970s, the last station bit the dust, and over the years, the new Goldens Bridge station just got bigger and bigger. The commuter parking lot takes up acres and acres of space, and there still isn't enough room for cars to park. So that's progress in Goldens Bridge. Behind me, you can hear the other progress through Goldens Bridge, the highway of 684, which totally obliterated the small, sleepy hamlet that Goldens Bridge had become by the end of the 20th century. From here, we're going on to see another historic part of the railroad. We're going to officially bridge number L158 across the Croton Reservoir. Behind me is a railroad bridge that serviced the line that went from Goldens Bridge Station out to Mahopac. It's a 7-mile line that took the tourists who came up from New York City via the New York Central. Then they begin on the Mahopac branch and go out to Lake Mahopac to spend their summer holidays. Now, this bridge I need my cheat sheet for. It is officially a Whipple truss bridge, double span. It was originally built in 1883, and it was in Kingston, New York. The railroad acquired it in 1904 after the reservoir was being contemplated because they needed a larger bridge. So the bridge was brought here from Kingston, installed here in 1904. As I said, it's a Whipple double truss bridge. It's 16 feet across. Each span is 163 feet long. The railroad was in use, the bridge was in use. The railroad ran to Mahopac until 1959 when it was abandoned. In 1978, the bridge was named to the National Historic Register. So it is one of the few National Historic registered objects in our town. The building behind me is the Methodist Episcopal Church. This building owes its life to the reservoir again, as do so many of the homes and buildings in Goldens Bridge. In 1904, it was decided that the church had to be moved. The original building was built in 1855. So the workmen got it up onto the equipment to move the building. It was waiting very patiently to be moved when along came a windstorm, knocked the church off of the moving apparatus, smashed it into many pieces. The church was not kind of like Humpty Dumpty. It was really hard to put together again. So using the pieces, they came to the site, what originally planned for that 1855 church, and in about 1904 built the edifice that's standing behind me now. It served the community for many decades, but in the early 60s it fell into disrepair. The congregation had probably moved on to other congregations, and the building became derelict. It was rescued by Philip France, an architect who reappointed it, who refurbished it on the inside and the outside. He used it as his studio for quite a while. But then as time went on, he moved on to different spaces, and now it is the home of the veterinary care clinic. And this has been here for the last 6 or 7 years. And so that's the story of that church. Well, here's where people go shopping nowadays. We wanted to just show you that there still is industry, there still is shopping, there still are plenty of places to go in Goldens Bridge, but historically, the buildings have all been wiped out. The old shopping area was down on Route 22, which is slightly west of here, which runs parallel to 684. But now if you want to do your shopping, you come here. In the old days, you would go to the drugstore, the beauty salon, and especially the A&P. The A&P was a small storefront Although this has been the A&P's home for the past several decades, the A&P used to have its home in a small storefront on Route 22. And if the manager didn't have what you wanted, especially an order of meat, at lunchtime, he'd close down the A&P up here, go down to Katona A&P, get your meat order, and bring it back and have it for you that afternoon. It was service with a smile, personalized by Jack. But for a long time, this has been the place where people come to do their shopping in Goldens Bridge.
Okay.
This is the barn in the Goldens Bridge colony. The colony was a co-op started by professionals and workers about 1927 when they bought an old dairy farm. And so this barn behind me was the cow barn originally. And in fact, when the members of the colony first started using it for their dances and their cultural entertainments, they tell me there were still cows housed in the basement. The barn continues its active part of the community life by presenting dances here. There are dances held here on the weekends. But in the past, the barn served as a place for plays. Famous actors came here during the summer to do their thing. One of them being Morris Karnofsky, who became a famous Shakespearean actor. It also was the site of many folk and ethnic songfests. Pete Seeger, not Woody Guthrie, but Pete Seeger and other Lead Belly, other folk singers of the 30s and early 40s performed here. When the people first formed this co-op back in the late 1920s, property sold for $700 an acre. And since most of the people were working class from the Bronx, they really couldn't afford to put up their houses right away. So many people lived in tents until they, year by year, had enough wherewithal to make their houses, to build their houses. Even today, you can see so many different houses in this community. It's a very eclectic place. It's a beautifully wooded area, and it has an 8-acre lake, which is down on Pond Street, and the lake has often served as the summertime community place to gather for the people of the community. It was dammed and made from a stream which ran through a ravine that goes through the property. Also, this area was the scene of one of the first town day camps, well predating the Lewisboro Town Day Camp, and children from the colony and surrounding areas of Goldens Bridge would come to the day camp in the summer. This old cow barn has seen many iterations, and it remains as an icon of the colony and of Goldens Bridge and of the town of Lewisboro, welcoming all. The Simeon Brady house, standing on the knoll behind me, is one of the most recognizable places in the town of Lewisboro. It stood up there on its little hillside for over 2 centuries. It replaced the original cabin built by the Brady family, which was at one point thought to be the oldest house in Westchester County. But that house was replaced around 1800 by Simeon Brady, one of the many Simeon Bradys. They're kind of hard to tell apart. But he built it on the occasion of his marriage. And over the years, it's gotten a little larger, a little more, another story was added, the mansard roof was added, and the columns in front were added. The original roof was made out of copper, but when the copper started to leak, Simeon took the copper off the roof and, being a frugal gentleman, made his wife copper pots and pans for her kitchen from the former roof. At one point, the Brady family holdings and their cattle farms were the largest in Westchester and Putnam County. And one of the reasons that Goldens Bridge Railroad Station was the important place that it was. The Bradys and Increase Miller both lay claim to giving land for the original schoolhouse in Goldens Bridge, which was known as the Herman Chapel School. There was the Herman Chapel and the Herman Chapel School, which we will go, which we're off of Increase Miller Road, which we will see the remains of the Herman Chapel Cemetery in a few minutes. Meanwhile, this beautiful house stands on the corner of 138 and Increase Miller Road on one of the most wicked curves in the town. But as you drive by, take a moment to peer off to your right and watch for this beautiful house. One of Lewisboro's most intriguing mysteries you can find here on the roadside of Increase Miller Road. I'm sitting on a stone wall that was once part of the Brady Cemetery, otherwise known as the Herman Chapel Cemetery. And this pillar or support once held the monument for Simeon Brady. Seeing this stone here in the stone wall, but with no cemetery behind it. This obviously being a cemetery monument, but the ground behind it not being a cemetery, people wondered what happened to the stones, because this was the former site of the Brady Cemetery. Well, the story got around that Edward Brady had a fight with his brother Simeon and wanted to move all of Simeon's family out of the Brady Cemetery. Edward Brady actually was one of the promoters and people who started the Ivandale Cemetery in Somers around 1872. In the early 1900s, all of the graves, the Brady graves, were actually moved over to Ivandale. There was no family feud. The Bradys were not disinterred and just scattered willy-nilly. You can find all of the graves which were once here in the Brady Cemetery on Increase Miller Road, resting comfortably over in Ivandale off of Route 100 in Somers. But it is kind of nice to have this Simeon Brady monument here. We are going to now take a look at the cemetery, which is still here. As I said, all the Bradys have been moved, not for a family feud, but just because Ivandale opened up. It was a beautiful park-like cemetery, like they were making in the 1870s. And rest assured, they are resting just very peacefully. But what we're going to do is take a walk back onto the property that now is a former town cemetery. It's no longer active, but it was the Herman Chapel Cemetery and was used probably up until the late 1920s, the early 1930s. We are going to see the gravestones of Increase Miller and his wife Hannah as well. So follow me while I climb down off my perch, and I'll meet you in the Herman Chapel Cemetery. This is the Herman Chapel Cemetery, one of the 4 known cemeteries in Goldensbridge, and I'm standing next to the tombstone of Increase Miller, the man who gave his name to one of the elementary schools in our town. Increase died in 1854. His wife Hannah is next to him. She died 2 years earlier than Increase did. There's a little controversy as to who actually gave the property for this cemetery and for the chapel, which stood just to the north of us, which was called Herman Chapel. The Bradys, I have paperwork showing that the Bradys gave the property. There is also paperwork extant saying the Millers gave the property. Be that as it may, that this cemetery is one of the most unique in the town. This cemetery is unique in the fact that half the stones face west, and as you go further down the hill, the other half of the stones are facing east. It's also a cemetery where we keep finding more and more stones as the years have gone by. When we did the first inventory about 30 years ago, we found about 60 stones. And over the last couple of decades, every time I wander through the cemetery, I seem to be finding more and more stones. It is a beautiful place. It's a very restful place to be on a warm summer afternoon. But it is on private property, so we will not divulge its location other than to say it is off of Increase Miller Road. And the Brady Cemetery is right to my back, the former Brady Cemetery. As I said before, as you head west down the hill in this cemetery, the gravestones which have their writing on the west face all of a sudden have their writing on the east face. So that's one of the mysteries of this cemetery. Well, I'd like to thank you for joining us this morning on our walk around the hamlet of Goldensbridge, another walk in the series of our walks around Lewisboro with your town historian, Maureen Cole. I hope you'll be with us next time when we visit another one of Lewisboro's lovely hamlets.
You're watching Lewisboro Community Television, Channel 20.